Good afternoon, and welcome to the Datapipe webinar series. We are really excited to be presenting an interesting discussion with 451 Research and Denon Marantz today on how to choose the right solution for your workload. Now, if you're not familiar with Datapipe, we are the leader in architecting, deploying, and managing hybrid IT solutions for the enterprise, including traditional IT, public, private, and hybrid clouds. Today, we have William Fellows, VP of Research from 451 Research, a trusted enterprise IT research firm. We also have Scott Strickland. He's the global CIO for Denon Marantz, which is a leading provider of premium branded audio and visual information and communication equipment. At the end, Denon Marantz will be giving away one of their incredible HEOS 5 Bluetooth speakers, so stick around to the end and see if you've won. We'll also take questions at the end, so please submit them throughout the conversation. I'll collect them through the chat window, and I'll queue you up for questioning at the end. Now, I'll turn it over to William to kick it off.
And move on again. So just to frame up the discussion in terms of choosing the right resource to meet the right workload need, I think it would be interesting just for us to frame up at a high level what is going on here. There's clearly a shift towards an asset-light models inside organizations. People are trying to not build data centers if they can help it. And if you move along to the next slide, clearly the beneficiaries of this will be all of the folks who offer some kind of hosted third-party service. And indeed, the slide here has come directly from that commentator network to ask our survey base where they intend to spend their IT budget. And you can see that we're getting to the point where more than 50% now is being allocated to hosted services, and indeed you can see the breakdown there of the different kinds of hosting which are going to be the beneficiaries if you'd like to move on. The most common deployment model we're seeing on infrastructure as a service at the moment is Amazon with some Azure. Azure is clearly picking up ground, and if you'd like to move on again, but it's clear that the drivers for moving to cloud now are strictly in line with business outcomes here, either increasing revenue or delivering better cost control or improving product and speed to market and so on. So those are the kind of macro trends. I also run a peer group event of our enterprise customers 2 or 3 times a year to understand what they are looking for from service providers, if you'd like to move on. And this kind of summarizes where these folks are. I guess the most importantly, they're saying that infrastructure as a service, while it's necessary, it is insufficient now. In other words, they're looking to work with providers who can not only host their systems, but also take part in the management of them to help them meet their kind of business goals. And their advice for their peer groups are, avoid vendor lock-in and go to the cloud when you're in the driver's seat in terms of security and data sovereignty and recovery and transparency and so on. Choose vendors which, how can engage with you at an enterprise level, asking what do you want to achieve and how do you want to achieve it, rather than just offering what you see is what you get service. We found that offering secure and high available service at low cost is much more important than the inner workings of the system, but that runaway costs are a real fear for organizations who really want to have a cloud delivered their way. I'd like to move on. So we think that really the key opportunity here is really beyond infrastructure. And that to take advantage of that opportunity, really we need to be thinking about solving issues that are both economic, technical, and organizational, because demand for our delivering IT services is growing. It's irreversible and underpinned by, well, the experience of using new style IT services, and that's principally cloud and new generation apps. And it's driving disruption both on the supply and the demand side. So you can avoid having to provision for peak capacity, and that will always be a winning ticket for CIOs to take to their board when they're fighting for budget. But it also disrupts the industry. Lower volume, higher volume sales lower priced architectures, and there's a lot of confusion. Companies are breaking themselves up, selling themselves off, taking themselves private in order to respond. On the technology side, well, consumer technology set such a high bar that users' expectations of IT in the workplace have been raised fairly dramatically, and suppliers are doing a good job of addressing this. But so far, the number of organisations which have been able to turn themselves from cost centres into IT delivery organisations is still pretty small. We think the key bottleneck really is an organisational one. It's one about the change required to start using these kinds of services, and indeed what happens when you bring them in. Next slide, please. So just to remind ourselves where we are, so in 2006 disruptive innovation came to the market when Amazon pulled this rabbit out of a hat with the launch of S3 and EC2. It was consumption-based and service-driven with a retail model discipline, but at the same time it was also very engineering-led, good enough operationally, and customers were along for the ride. If we move to the next slide and fast forward to 2015, you can see that rabbit still enjoys a substantial lead over the chasing pack. But there are other dogs in the race now, right? And we find in our research that Amazon's revenue is now 1.2 times the revenue of the other 170 infrastructure as a service vendors we have under cover, and that's pretty incredible. But let's forget about the race and consider the options. So innovation's been sustained, services are now more predictable and business-led, and the customer's in the driving seat. I think the key takeaway to remember is that Amazon's now selling services at 100th of the price it did in 2006, which offers a 6 times better price performance than even predicted by Moore's Law. And of course, the chasing pack is going to ask, how long Amazon can continue to drive this, and who's got the legs to stay the course, and will anyone catch the rabbit? So moving on, please. So in terms of the market itself, the cloud computing as a service market, we've got about nearly 400 vendors under coverage. About 60% of that market was infrastructure as a service last year, and more or less equally divided between storage and compute. And obviously, Amazon at the moment has more than 50% of that market, but there are some, interesting other players now generating revenue here. Moving along, please. But just as a sanity and reality check, so when we think about infrastructure as a service compared to the other kinds of hosting, shared, managed, dedicated, etc., those markets are still 8 or 9 times as big as infrastructure as a service, and they are all growing. This is not a zero-sum game. And I would say that even the amount of business that Amazon is doing in terms of the net dollar value is pretty small, but it's having a profound effect on the industry. And for the most part, I think many of these vendors now are rolling over to the fact that they need to be able to offer infrastructure as a service either natively or from partners. Otherwise, their customers are going to go elsewhere for service. Moving along, please. So after talking to our commentator network, it seems that over and above the infrastructure, that 70% of the spending now is going to be, on services which run on top of that. It's the security, application hosting, and other managed services, and so on. So if we go to the next slide, you can see that now where we are today, if you sort of characterize it maybe as the end of the beginning, that there's a confusing marketplace with many different vendors, lots of different kinds of things, to buy and put together, and end users are going to be understandably confused about these many things in the market. When if we move along, you can see that really what the issues that they're facing are moving from pilots into production. If you could move to the next slide, please. They're looking for business outcomes. They're looking to pick the right partners. Moreover. Next slide, please. So, so how best execution venues are affecting IT consumption. So we've been using this for a number of years now to describe how users can select the most suitable venue to meet their need. It's not a term that I made up. I borrow it from some European financial legislation guaranteeing that the financial services in firms in Europe guarantee that they are executing transactions at the best possible price and the best environment, and I've applied it to cloud. So if you'd like to move on one. So, users, I think, now expect to make decisions about how and where to run apps and tasks and select services based upon workload profile, policies, SLA, etc. But if you could move along the slide, just one, please. As the worlds of outsourcing and hosting and managed services converge, those options are growing exponentially. We think that best execution venue strategies can help users determine which hybrid and multi-cloud services are right for their need, because the most sophisticated IT users may operate these sort of suppliers and relationships independently, but even those with contract negotiation expertise will struggle with the complexity of mechanisms available. So if we could move the slides along, that would be great. I think we must have missed one or two there, but nonetheless. But the reality is that many organizations don't have access to more than a handful of cloud resources, in the same way that me and you probably don't have access to more than a handful of utilities, and where they do exist, they're sort of bilateral. This is why we think that third-party tools and mechanisms, including technical and financial brokers, business application market, integrators, and so on, have an important role to play in providing access to other venues, because some apps and workloads are going to be best suited to running on-prem, others in a multi-tenant public environment, and other in a more dedicated hosted venue. And for this reason, we think multi-cloud services, making use of different services to meet the different requirements, makes sense. And this has to be for all of the kind of customer segments: the folks who are coming to the cloud first, the folks who are seeking to look at other types of cloud use, and enterprises transitioning. If you could move to the next slide, please. And how do we know this? Well, again, when we survey our commentator network, it turns out that most of them are already using more than one kind of hosted service, and you can see here that the numbers there in terms of what kinds of services are in use, and those clearly add up to more than 100%. So typically there's more than one service in operation. In fact, if we go to the next slide, we can even show in more detail the kinds of use cases which are going to be executed and run in which kinds of environments. The percentages here are less important than the fact that users are going to choose a range of different venues to host different types of workloads. This is definitely going to be a sort of a multi-service and multi-cloud future. Next slide, please. If we think about the pain points that still exist, well, they're still there, but they're being addressed. And in fact, if we move on again to the next slide, we think that actually when we talk to our enterprise end users, that actually it's more to do with non-IT things, organizational issues, which are the roadblocks more than the technology itself. So if we'd like to move on one more slide, we can see that so the takeaway really on this piece is that the opportunities beyond infrastructure per se, and enterprises are using multiple services to meet different needs. Next slide, please. So we think that having a customer relationship and a partnership with trust, all of these things are still the bellwethers for establishing a long-term commercial relationship with users. So moving on, I just wanted to quickly look at some of the tools that are available. If you move on to the next slide, it's my belief that excuse me, there are cloud management services out there which can help users sort of navigate to these destinations, and they can help users answer the question, well, how do I make my internal services as flexible as Amazon or Azure? or how do I make our business look at us like a service, or am I paying too much, and so on. There's a number of different services which are available, and you can see them here. If you'd like to move on to the next slide, cloud broker services, also known as a decision engine, which provides service selection. Moving on to the next slide. This provides access to multiple cloud suppliers, and it gives users access to a wider range of venues and services, and they would be able to, ordinarily take advantage of. It can take care of the delivery and fulfillment and API handling, and lots of complex things, as well as the service selection itself. Moving on to the next slide. In fact, we think that if cloud is the on-demand version of computing, brokering is the on-demand version of IT procurement, and really this is the thing that powers best execution venue strategies. Moving on, given the investments made, success for the cloud service providers is going to be dependent on their services being destinations not only for new applications but also for replatforming and moving of legacy applications and so on. And this is the opportunity that companies in the migration and integration space are targeting. Moving on to the next slide. The issue really is that they're expensive and complex, and we think there's a good deal of innovation needs to be brought here. Next slide, please. The consumption management and optimization and tariff management technologies out there are enjoying the most success in terms of revenue at this point, because the benefits that they show are more immediately visible. Next slide, please. And typically they'll provide a console to help you understand how much is being used, how you could extract better utility and so on by using different kinds of services. Next slide, please. The other piece we think that's going to be important here is being able to get a forensic understanding of pricing and TCO, so that users can understand the relative cost of doing things in different kinds of environments. Moving on to the next slide, please. And that's what here at 451 Research, that's what we're offering with our Cloud Price Index, which is like a consumer price index, measures the cost of a basket of consumer goods over time. The Cloud Price Index measures the price of a basket of cloud goods and services over time to understand how much users are paying relative to the market rate, and helps vendors with their pricing strategies. Next slide, please. So that brings me to the end of my segment. I'm happy to share any of the research with anyone on the call if they'd like to follow up and send me an email. In the meantime, what I'd like to do is to hand over to Scott Strickland, who is the Global CIO at Denon Marantz. Scott.
Thank you very much, William. Appreciate that. There we go. Thank you very much, William. Appreciate that introduction. I'm going to take you through how we address some of the trends, and it's interesting, William and I did not put together our presentations in collusion, but hopefully you'll find that a lot of the major trends that he identified, I can give you specific use cases on, here's what we did and here's how we decided how we're going to move forward. So before we can even get started, we need to talk a little bit about who is Denon Marantz. So I put together on the next slide a quick overview of us as a company. If you could advance the slide, please. Perfect. Because ultimately what we need to build is we need to build an infrastructure and application set that is capable of delivering the necessary services for our organization. So the org itself, you may not know us, or you may, but we're over 100 years old. We have factories in China and Vietnam and Japan, as well as spread throughout North America. Music consumption has been changing a lot recently. Obviously, people 10 years ago didn't even think about streaming music, and 20 years ago didn't even think of something like an iPod. So what we're doing and our types of products have needed to change over the years as well to keep up with that. We are sold through a lot of the major retailers, and the reason this is relevant is because our systems need to be able to support that. Somebody like a Walmart or a Best Buy doesn't have a big sense of humor if we're not able to deliver on time or per our projected service levels. So if we take a look at our actual cloud roadmap on the next slide, it was ultimately a multi-year journey. And what I wanted to share was this is something that worked for us. It may work for you, it may not, but we were one of the first ones to recognize that we needed to move to the cloud. And the big driver on that actually is we're a private equity owned company, which means that our ability to really leverage assets is critical. And to cut through some of that, we have to save money year over year because ultimately our owners want us to have a good return on capital. When I came in about 4.5 years ago or so, and I looked for savings opportunities, as well as an opportunity to increase service, it was clearly by going to this newfangled cloud, quote-unquote, solution. So the first thing we had to do was we went through a select and alignment period, and my subsequent slides will take you through each one of these. But then we executed. Now we've established a platform that we're going to be able to grow and innovate on. In those early years, I needed to drive some significant savings. Oops, if we could slide back one, so that I could fund some of the additional build out. So as I looked at this, I said, okay, as I consolidate some of these data centers, we need to pick the most expensive ones first, not necessarily the easiest ones first. So it was a different driver. In past companies, when I execute migrations, you typically look for an easier one as you start, and then you can build out your operating model and then gradually start to tackle more and more difficult challenges. In this case, it had to be based on financial constraints, not on scope. If we think about the way we use cloud as well, it's very different from other companies. We have 110 global websites. Our revenues are split globally as well, roughly 30-30-30, and those 110 global websites mean that we have to be up almost 24/7. There's not a maintenance window at 2 a.m., if you will, that we can take down for, because it's always 5 o'clock somewhere, or it's always noon somewhere in the world. We also are leveraging the Amazon portion of the cloud, and I'll take you through that in a moment. We have a significant mobile applications network. So people are running our AVRs in their homes, and they've downloaded our apps. We have over 1 million active users right now who are using a Denon Marantz or Boston Acoustics app on their Android or iOS device, and we're hosting those apps and some of the features in the cloud as well. We also, in our new products, are network enabled. So we have the added bonus and difficulty of supporting an IoT, Internet of Things infrastructure as well. So there's roughly 75,000 or so users around the world that need the cloud to be up in order for their speakers and devices to actually even function. So that's been really an interesting learning for us as well, and also points to our belief in the cloud, because we can't have these products go down. If my infrastructure, if you will, goes down, I'm not just impacting my business users or enterprise users, I'm impacting over 75,000 consumers in their homes in real time. So now moving on, if we take a look at the way we've looked at the cloud, we started with why can't we use the public cloud? Because the public cloud is the cheapest approach for us. And so that was the crystallizing call to arms, if you will, when we originally set this up about 4 years ago. It was a why not public cloud? So as we rolled in new applications, as we consolidated our business and the like, we wanted them to run on the public cloud. If you look at some of the applications I've listed there, and these are apps that we're running, the traditional apps of ERP are still hosted for us in our private cloud. So there on the left, you can see we've got Oracle, Hyperion, we have JD Edwards, and we have SAP, and those are hosted in an enterprise cloud that Datapipe runs for us. We have 3 data centers worldwide, Hong Kong, London, and New Jersey, that we put our ERP systems into so that they can be closest to the end users. We've also put some traditional hardware type applications into the cloud. So you might think of a phone switch as not necessarily being cloud enabled or a video conferencing bridge. But in both those cases, we've chosen companies that offer cloud-based solutions. So if you think of thinking phone networks, We've just gone live in Europe now, so we're in North America and Europe on a cloud-based phone switch. We don't have a traditional Avaya or Nortel switch in any of our buildings in North America or Europe any longer. Instead, we're leveraging thinking phones for that. Blue Jeans we're using for our video conferencing bridge service. So we've gone beyond, and we've really tried to focus on beyond just, okay, can we move apps there, but can we also move infrastructure as well? Where we could, as well as we added capabilities into the organization, we wanted those to be hosted in the public cloud. So something like a ServiceNow for our incident management and help desk management system. We didn't have one 4 years ago, and as we looked at evaluating and putting one in, it was a requirement, if you will, that it was capable of being hosted in a public cloud. So now moving on and talking about our specific journey. I spoke about us needing to select and align in 2002 and 2011. The first thing we had to do, though, is know what the heck was out there. How many data centers did we have? Where were they located? What was in each? So we had to inventory these. There were originally 68 quote-unquote data centers, and these ranged from true data centers in one of our owned facilities to a closet. So, you know, a closet isn't necessarily a data center, but by the same token, it's something that we need to move servers, you know, file servers, print servers, or even application servers out of. We also found servers underneath a lot of people's desks. I didn't end up counting those as data centers. If I did, we'd probably be in the 100 or so, or 110, because there were some groups, especially within engineering, that had servers underneath their desk. We selected Datapipe and a single Tier 1 network carrier. I'll speak a little bit later, but it's absolutely critical as you think about moving to the cloud to really understand what your network architecture is going to be and how you're going to support that. Because once you're cloud-based, not being able to get to the internet no longer is an inconvenience, but it actually becomes business critical. And as I indicated earlier, we really looked for the savings opportunities and implemented accordingly. The map up there that I put, the little blue map, really does represent where our most significant data centers before were, and then the red dots, as I indicated, represent where we have the data centers now. Or I should say where Datapipe has them. So a roadmap's one thing, and getting through the RFP process is fine, but then you actually have to execute. And that's what we did for the next 2 years or so in 2012 and 2013. We were able to pull together about 80% of our locations in those 2 years. What that means for us is that was really shaking the money tree. And we were able to drive about $800K, over $800K actually, of savings, and that became the gift that kept on giving. Because once we had the $800K, that's year over year over year, so my 4 or 5 year budget, if you will, savings goes down by almost 4 or 5 million. So that's a beautiful thing. During that time frame as well, we did divest 2 companies and acquired 1. So as we went through this, it wasn't just a static target for us. We had to refresh our data center inventory. We had to adjust the network architecture as we brought on additional facilities. For example, during that time, we brought on some facilities in Australia that originally we had no network connectivity to. And as we went through this, it wasn't just a money play. We were suddenly, and it makes sense, we were suddenly, because we were pulling servers out of closets and pulling them out from underneath desks and consolidating from second and third tier data centers to top tier data centers, we were really able to improve our overall service level. We were really able to improve our reliability. And the end users noticed. So there's certainly a pain in the butt factor, or a PITA factor as we call it, as you execute some of these migrations. But if you can communicate the story to the end user base that service levels will increase as part of it, and then they can actually see that, they're going to be a lot happier. So checking the next slide then, as we finished the majority of our execution, it then got fun. It became a lot more fun because we were able to grow. We've established some of these platforms. We know how the platforms work. We have the network in and out of our major partner data centers, and we know what we're capable of doing. So that allowed us to get to about 95% consolidation. at the end of this year or so, and really realize some of those benefits of scale. Once again, the company did not stand still for us. Wish it would, but it didn't. We divested another company and acquired another one. It was a lot simpler this time because we knew where the puzzle pieces were going to fit. We knew how to slide those companies in and out and where some of their application stacks would need to move. During this time period as well, for the first time, we started to move some of our end user, end consumer applications and consumer products into the cloud. Because we had a confidence level in the cloud that we didn't have before, we were willing to make that migration. And part of that, and our ability to make that migration, was highly dependent on AWS. We started to use AWS in early 2014, and we've continued to expand it almost monthly. They make it really easy to expand. They also make it easy to contract, which is nice, but they make it almost too easy to expand for us. 2016, as I look out to our next year, we're actually pretty excited about it. We're going to get to end user support or end consumer support of over 1 million products. So right now we're at that 75,000 level or so of products, and we're going to get to about 1 million next year, which means our IoT, Internet of Things infrastructure is going to need to be able to scale accordingly. And we're going to look into some WAN acceleration solutions. We have some that we've already implemented. It's going to be a matter of continuing to expand those into more of our remote offices. Again, it's critical as you look at it on how you're going to leverage your network and what your network architecture is going to look like. Part of that needs to be, especially in a global organization, some sort of WAN acceleration strategy. We're going to get to the fabled promised land, we hope, on unified communication as part of our cloud-based phone rollout. There's additional features available in that, everything from desktop-based video conferencing to IMing to being able to take it onto your mobile device will be available for us. And we're going to start to play with some business continuity. So excited about a disaster recovery. It will be a lot simpler now that we have everything inventoried and moved into the cloud for us to get that on any of our internal applications. Obviously, for some of our SaaS providers, there's an assumption that we've made that they're going to provide the business continuity there. But for us, on some of our enterprise apps, we're going to be able to provide that via the cloud. So the next slide is actually going to show us a little bit about the products and how our products interact with the cloud as well. So on the left, I've drawn out one of our HEOS speakers. HEOS is something similar to Sonos. It basically connects into a variety of streaming services that I've listed down there in the cloud, everything from Pandora to Spotify to iHeartRadio. Also, obviously, allows you to stream music off your phone or mobile device if you want to as well. We run that off of an application that sits on your mobile device. So just like you would have an app for anything else, you have an app that runs your HEOS product, if you will, and that app needs to go out to our cloud via Amazon and via Datapipe in order to work. So when you hit go or connect to my speaker, within milliseconds, certainly less than a second, it needs to come back with a response, and you need to start hearing music come across your speaker. Otherwise, you're going to be an unhappy consumer. So as I indicated, we have about 75,000 people out there that are doing this for us. About 50,000 people a day are doing it. And so far, it's worked. So that's me knocking on wood. But if the cloud isn't up, then people can't rock. But we've proven, and certainly Amazon has been great there as well, we've proven that it's scalable and it works. Next slide will take us a little bit through some of our lessons learned. Interestingly, William talked a little bit about the need to select a partner. And he said, there's a lot of different ways you can evaluate partners. And they have some good research on that. And what that means for us is we don't just want a vendor. We want somebody who will understand our business. Whether you select Datapipe or whether you select somebody else, make sure that they understand your business, make sure they understand your vision, and that they're capable of meeting that. Something else that's very important for us when we think about that partnership is our partner needs to understand how critical our infrastructure is to our end consumers as well. And that means that when you talk about alerts or escalations, that they have that same sense of urgency that we do internally in order to execute on those. I touched on this a little bit earlier around the importance of talking to the business about what's in it for them. As we move to the cloud, very rarely did I just talk about, hey, I'm moving servers. No, it's here's the story. Here's the additional features you're going to be able to get, for example. Here's the additional response time. Here's the consolidated collaborative email type environment we're going to be able to have. And in every case, we put together an announcement. We communicated it out globally, or as we rolled it out, that said, here's the benefit, and here's why you care. I've spoken a lot to the impact on the network. Something we've really learned, besides the need for the internet to always be up and to have a DIA circuit always available, is that our usage of MPLS has decreased dramatically. Whereas we used to have an MPLS line at every one of our sites worldwide, our newer sites, we aren't even implementing MPLS. Instead, what we're doing is we're going with 2 diverse carriers running 2 separate DIA circuits. And for the majority of our use cases, that will work fine. Now, you flood it with bandwidth, obviously, and you run, a big circuit as opposed to a small, but 2 redundant circuits into an office will work for us. Significant cost savings there as well when you start thinking about making that change. We needed to establish a single view into our partner. We didn't want to get one view on, hey, here's what it's costing you, with another view on here's how many tickets came through last month, and yet another view on here's the latest escalations. We need a dashboard, right? And that's an overused term quite often, but what we're able to get is once a month, I have a high-level executive summary on those 3 areas, and then there's a dashboard you can log into ad hoc, daily, hourly, minute by minute, even if you choose, where you can get the latest and greatest on monitoring and ticketing and spend. Now, this is beyond just your typical Amazon dashboard. So for us, this is a dashboard that really consolidates what's going on with a couple of our different cloud vendors into a single view. And obviously, we'd be foolish if we didn't learn from our mistakes. So after each of our major implementations, what we tried to do is we tried to have a lessons learned, and just sat down. It usually helps to do it over beer. Sat down and talk about, here's what worked, here's what didn't, how are we going to change that when we go on to Tokyo, for example, or how are we going to change what we learned in London as we roll out into Amsterdam. And that allowed us to really get a lot faster, a lot smoother, a lot cleaner from one implementation to the next. So it's been quite a journey. We've really enjoyed the journey looking back. The best times are ahead of us, and I'm certainly glad that the hard times are behind us at this juncture. So I think I'm going to turn it back over to Andy, and I think Andy might be opening it up for questions as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Scott, and to you as well, William. We do have a couple questions from the audience that they had brought in. The first is for Scott, actually. You mentioned Internet of Things. How is that added complexity to your service level requirements that is really different from the traditional online applications that you support? Do you see a lot of differences there, or are they kind of in the same vein, just a higher level of service?
For our infrastructure leader, he calls it as the same because he comes from the financial services industry, and they needed to be able to execute trades internally for his trading desk, if you will, at his prior company. And so if their trades weren't working, then as far as they were concerned, the entire application was down and the entire data center was down. So he's brought that mentality for us, if you will, here in terms of both our internal service levels and our external service levels. Now, if you don't have somebody as retentive as that or as turbo as that, then yes, it's a higher service level agreement. Ultimately, because when you impact end consumers, your visibility, especially nowadays with social media and the like, your visibility to that end consumer is a lot higher. And I think recently Netflix was down for a little bit. It wasn't an extended window, but it was down for a little bit, and they got a lot of bad press for it. We have something very similar. If our speakers aren't up, it's very easy for people to get out there and blog about us or to get onto social media and Facebook and post about the fact that they were trying to hold a party and suddenly their speakers weren't working. So the stakes are a little bit higher, if you will, than they used to be.
Okay, thank you. This question is for William. You talked about in the beginning, you're seeing the the blend of different service providers that are being used right now, have you seen enterprises kind of consume both AWS and, let's say, an Azure or another public cloud in that way? Or are you seeing people generally stick with one public cloud and then use, obviously, maybe a private cloud or some other sort of solution to that model?
Well, so surveying both users, partners, and integrators, you know, whatever the vendors might tell you about them, you know, customers being all in on on their platform, it actually turns out that, well, as I sort of alluded to, that the deployment use case we see the most now is for enterprises using AWS, but also using Azure for specific, you know, workloads as well. So there is a real mix. Now, if you talk to, you know, integrators and so on, and I'm sure you have experience of this as well, that they'll say that they don't know of any customer who isn't doing some kind of multiple, you know, multi-cloud deployment rather than a single cloud. I mean, you know, I think the examples of customers who are quote unquote all in, well, that kind of means different things to different people, and that's very often all in will mean you know, a project or a department. So what we're seeing is that people are using multiple clouds to you know, to satisfy particular requirements. Now, we're not talking here about folks moving application and workloads between different clouds based upon minute by minute or penny by penny changes in price or anything else. So that's a very small use case. In fact, you know, there's very little evidence of that. Instead, it tends to be you know, a one-off deployment into a cloud, you know, for a period of time, and clearly these different services have their, you know, different sort of capabilities, especially with regard to the workload that the user is looking to get done.
All right, very interesting. Another question from the audience came in around, this is back for Scott, I guess more for, you know, as an acquisitive company that you guys are, what are some of the considerations that people should take into account when kind of integrating those acquired companies into the fold, especially when you're dealing with such a cloud-based IT organization?
One of the first things you need to be able to do is when you acquire a company is to get out there and inventory what they have and determine how you're going to disposition basically their applications and their infrastructure. So what the cloud's enabled us to do is to give us a platform to move a lot of those acquired applications or their infra to. Now, in some cases where it's gotten interesting, it's expanded our overall use cases. So you may not have 100% fit on the platform, or you may acquire a company that has a capability that you don't currently have in your closet that you're going to need to be able to build out. We had an instance where we acquired a company and they had online collaboration capability need, and that they were currently executing via a vendor and a platform that we hadn't supported, and we didn't have an application or a platform to support that in our portfolio. So what we had to do is we said, okay, I see how they're doing it now. The way they're doing it doesn't support our cloud strategy. So we're actually going to move them as part of the acquisition to a different application that we don't even own, you know, that we're going to have to acquire just for this purpose. So what it did is it expanded the use case for us of the cloud and of some of the platform that we'd already implemented, which is kind of fun. You know, it's a lot more fun to continue to grow and learn and see what's out there as opposed to just executing a lateral move every time.
Yeah. Okay. So those are the questions from the typed in. So I'll unmute the audience. If anyone has any questions they want to bring to Scott or to William, please step forward there.